All right, welcome back, everybody. We have Ryan Wegner, a brilliant guy that I've met through Peter Diamandis's Abundance Digital Group, and he's helped me out understand a number of things. Ryan worked in endpoint security and it has quite an extensive background in information security, but he's also a leader in my field of virtual reality and how that's affecting a lot of things, and particularly during this time period where we're some people say it's not fair to say socially whatever distancing, because no, we don't want to do that. We want to socially get together and help each other through this. We just want to physically distance. So this is the best guy I know for virtually bringing us together. So thank you so much, Ryan. What do you got for us? What do you think's interesting today?
For sure. So I'll start with why I got really interested in virtual reality. So Larry talked a bit about my background. I started off working in government. That was my first job out of school, was working in government, and we worked in like cubicles and basically cubicle farms. So everybody's present. You have to go to work every day. You know, I had like an hour commute. The work was amazing and the people there were amazing. And the interactions you could have when you could stand up and walk over to, you know, one of your peers' desks and start talking and problem solving, that was all fantastic. I found though, that required me, of course, to live in a specific city, right? I had to live, in my case, it was Ottawa, Canada. My family was in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is much further. And I didn't really like having to be so far from family for the job. So the job kind of controlled where I would be in the world and sort of what people I would engage with because of having to be physically close. And of course, this was early 2000s. So, you know, Zoom didn't exist. The best thing you could do was maybe do chat, or I think, when did FaceTime come out? I can't even think of the year. It seems like we've had these things forever, but I mean, there was a time, I mean, most of you remember this, like not even, 20 years ago, where none of this stuff really was widespread. When I left government and started working for first Darktrace and then CrowdStrike, they had this, what I thought was a novel idea, being from government and being kind of stuck in these cubicle farms. They're like, you can just work from home. What we'll do is we're going to ship you a laptop, set up in your home office, and we're going to do everything over this Slack thing and the Zoom thing, and we're going to have all our meetings there, and we don't actually have to meet physically. And a lot of the guys I was working with still primarily used phones, right? We would phone call each other, and we would use, of course, we'd use FaceTime audio instead of the video. And we started to kind of figure out that in some disciplines like IT security, you could do a lot of the stuff from home remotely. You didn't have to be physically there. And then we had to sort of find ways to still interact with each other and feel like we could kind of be together. And a lot of it was offsites. So both all three companies I've worked through remotely have had offsites quarterly. So quarterly, everybody would get together, go to the US, and because the US was where these companies are mostly based, and meet up, and then we'd have that social person-to-person interaction, right? Because there's definitely something that's missing when we're talking over Zoom. I can hand wave, I can do all this stuff, and I've become more of a hand waver now that I've been using Zoom more, because it kind of helps draw people into the conversation. Whereas if you kind of just sit and talk, it doesn't feel natural. When you're with people, there's so much body language going on. So I try to portray that body language over Zoom. So that's why I'm hand waving. But the idea being, a lot of people still miss that physical interaction. So you have to have these offsites, which are quite expensive, to just gather everybody together for the benefit of physically being close and talking. So I've been working remotely for about 5 years now. And I started getting interested in virtual reality because I found some of the earlier virtual reality apps, once you get into them and you can move and you get sort of that spatial location, like this would be a very different conversation if we were all in a room and I could see how everybody was reacting to what I'm saying, right? I could see, are your shoulders slumping? Do you look like you're bored? Are you excited? Are you upright? Are you really engaged in conversation? Some of the early times that I talked with Larry in VR in Rumi, which is one of the ones we tried early on, immediately you could see just a person's posture, and just because you could sort of, your brain sort of figures out where their hands are in space, probably where their arms are in space, and how their head is sitting.
The first thing that stood out, I remember, was you were the one who had an HTC Vive with 2 controllers. And the way Rumi interprets that is, if you are just using a PC or your phone, it works. You don't have any hands. If I had my Oculus Go at the time, which had 1 hand controller. So I was able to do stuff with my hand that the people with their phones could not do. You having it gave you 2 hands, and I was like, I want two now. You know, I know. I mean, I got envy, and that's when I got the Quest.
And it made all the difference. Like simple actions like just clapping after
Yes,
something's done.
yes, absolutely. No Italian could have worked without at least two hands, right? Come on, I've got Maurice or Anthony. Would you guys want to be able to talk to somebody in virtual reality without two controllers? I said, need two hands. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow there. That was,
No, that's great.
but it's so true. And the other thing was the eye tracking too, though.
Yeah.
And that's not wasn't there, and that is creepy. That's the part that's that little where they call it uncanny valley almost, you know, where it's like I'm looking at you, but you're not looking at me, you know.
Yeah, sort of the that kind of that dead eye effect. Early on, that it definitely it would creep me out because someone would be looking their head towards you, but their eyes, of course, be going directly with their head. The eye tracking is actually so in VR chat, for example, and I haven't looked into what algorithm they're using to do this, but as you're looking around, it actually senses things in the environment that are probably going to draw your attention, right? So if I swing my head this way past somebody, VR chat assumes that you probably are going to linger your eyeballs on the person. So you get this weird effect where sometimes you'll see something and someone looks at you and their eyeballs stay on you and it feels more natural, right? So it's not actually, in that case, tracking your real eyes, although there are algorithms that do that, especially in the new Vive Pro, they have that. And I mean, that's going to become a thing in all headsets eventually. But the idea that they're inferring where you should be looking based on what's in the environment so that your eyes look more natural. And that makes a huge difference. Also, the blinking, it's really weird when you're talking to someone and they don't blink at all. Subconsciously, you expect people to blink. So a lot of these games are building that in. As characters are sitting there or as people's avatars are sitting there, every once in a while, they're just going to blink. And that makes you feel more at ease. It helps get rid of some of that uncanny valley. As long as
Do you remember? Do you remember the what was it a year or two ago? I guess Google Duplex, and it makes the phone call to book the hotel or the restaurant and also the haircut. And the most standing out the thing to me was how this is an AI calling. Goes, I'd like to make an appointment. And you're like, but it's like blinking. You know, it adds that more human feel to it. But uh, what are your understanding as far as actual eye tracking? Where are we? Because I personally don't think it's going to be a realistic platform for me until that's there. There are two things that have to be solved, and then I want to run this class, and I'm hoping we're like 2 years away. But I want eye tracking, and I want the comfort level to be where I think I would still today with like an Oculus or something, about an hour for most people. I need people to be able to spend 8 hours a day. So where are we on those two things, eye tracking and comfort?
So I'll start with eye tracking. The HTC Vive Pro, you can get a model with eye tracking.
So that's already available.
That's already available. Yeah, I haven't been able to try it out yet, just because it is their more expensive model. I have an HTC Vive Pro, but I'd have to actually get another one just for the eye tracking. And they're sort of using it for marketing research and stuff. And the idea being that, when you're in an environment, and advertisers want this a lot, like it's going to happen sooner.
Sure, because that's the most natural thing. When most we have at least 5 senses. Some people say there's a lot more. There's a sense of balance, a sense of humor, whatever. But it's your most of what we consider real is what we visually see, including, like, I'm sure you're well aware as anybody that people have suffered great pain. We're talking like amputees. When they put on virtual reality goggles and stuff, they can make the pain go away as effective as any morphine. Because of what we think is real is what we see. So when you look at somebody else, you look at their eyes. What are they doing? And it's not going to feel right until you can really look in somebody's eyes and feel natural that way. So,
yeah, so we're going to benefit from that, even though the advertisers want it because they want to know how long do your eyes linger on certain ads, right? And there's already been talk about
exactly right.
Yeah. Like, is this ad working? Because 5,000 people have walked into this environment. Of those 5,000, how many people and how long did their eyes linger on our poster compared to someone else's poster? Which one's working better? Which one attracts attention? So there's that, but also graphically, it's very intense, of course, to render some of these environments. So the other reason to have eye tracking is to try and adjust the environment for where you're looking. So as not just your head moves, but as your eyes gaze, it wants to render the things that you're looking at into a higher degree than everything else, because most of the outside of your vision is blurry anyways.
That's exactly right. And as a kid, my father was an artist, he was a painter. So I paid very close attention to that, looking that, if I'm going to draw my hand, the wall behind me is not clear. Right. There's a focal length that we actually need to know. It's quite testable. It's based on the distance between the lens of your eye and your retina, or in a camera, it's going to be the lens and the imager. But that's going to determine what's in focus, and they need to know that. So the real eye tracking to me should be able to shine in, see my retina, see my focal length, see exactly, and I'm sure that's exactly what they're doing, to see where I'm looking. And as Ryan just pointed out, just for advertisements.
And then so the higher end headsets, or the higher end headsets, you can adjust that quite a bit. So on the HTC Vive Pro, there's a nice little dial there. It'll adjust the focal point with your eyes. It's basically bringing the screen in or out to try and get directly on the middle of your eyes where you're looking. So that helps them. I mean, that could help them determine exactly where your gaze is going, right? Also what to render and what not to render. Some of the lower end headsets don't have that functionality at all. They basically take the average, say most people's eyes are this distance apart. We're going to optimize our headset for some range, and you won't be able to adjust that. And you can kind of fiddle with that. Like, if you have glasses or something where you have to move the headset, you can try and figure out where it sits best on your head. But that's one of the things is that, again, it's so very important to know where your eyes are looking.
All right. Now, I have a person that I trust very much when it comes to market segment and understanding what the people want. And this person, my daughter, 21 years old, might be in here at the moment. She's been in and out, has pointed at something that I think she's so right. This is not going to catch on when they're big, ugly goggles. It's got to be like cool eyeglasses. And I was just showing that it looks like Facebook, had come up with some, did I already change the darn site? Did I change it already? I guess I did. But I had this, they had picked something for their AR, for their AR standard, and they look like nice looking glasses. So how do you think it's realistic? Am I off to think that 2 years is we could have this? Or
so it depends on what you're looking for, and that's something I've been struggling with too. I'm using the HTC Vive Pro, and it's quite a hefty bit. Like I don't have it up here. My office is being renovation, so my headset is actually in a different room right now. It's a fairly heavy headset. When my wife plays Beat Saber, for example, she can play for a few songs and she notices in her neck that she's holding quite a bit of weight on her head. Even though they have a fairly nice strap which tries to distribute the weight, it's still very bulky. I've done 3 to 4 hour sessions now. So Half-Life Alyx just came out, which is like a really big boom for the gaming community for VR. And for me, I track the gaming community in VR a lot because that's where the cutting edge stuff is going to come out, and then it's going to sort of filter into the rest of the business applications in that. But on that game, I was able to go, 3-4 hour sessions. And I don't know if it's because I was just so wrapped up in it, or if I've just kind of built strength in my neck over time. I'm not sure why, but I was able to do the headset a lot longer than I thought I would be able to. So it's getting better. Now you look at some of the other headsets like the Quest, and I hear that one is getting to the point where it's very comfortable. It's still big, it's still bulky, but it's wireless, right?
I love my Quest. I honestly have not had much time to play with it. I went crazy in the first 2 weeks. I got pretty with the demo version of Beat Saber. I was looking to get this flying game, and I'm still eventually going to go back and get it, I guess. But the resolution is one thing to help it, but we also have refresh rates. Now, where are we in refresh rates, and what do we need to get to make that a realistic thing, to duplicate what your eyes see? I want virtual reality to be real reality. How far away is that?
So I'm gonna quote some numbers, and they're probably gonna be a little bit off because I'm gonna try and take them from memory. I think the Vive had a refresh rate of about 90 hertz. And I know the Index, so the Valve Index, which is one of the latest headsets that came out, premium headset, it's well over $1,000. I mean, it's sold out. You can't even get these things anymore. That refresh rate, I'm pretty sure it was 120 hertz.
And what do I need to like trick my eye? What am I actually refreshing at? Because I remember hearing numbers as a kid that our eyes take something like 30 frames. That's why video is 30 frames per right, and then if it's 3D or whatever, it would be 60 frames. But what does that refresh rate require to get that type of thing? 24 is in motion pictures, Joseph. So if you've ever done like that's what is that, NTSC or whatever, 20. They'd always add an extra frame for every six frames or something like that. Yeah, that's how they convert that.
Yeah, honestly, I think So in the gaming communities, a refresh rate, of course, is important too, right? Because when you're moving around a lot, you want to be able you want everything to be super smooth. And for a while there, 90 hertz was kind of the sweet spot. There are some monitors doing 120 hertz. I feel like if you can get VR at 120 hertz, you're pretty close. The problem is going to be the hardware you need to sustain drawing all those polygons, because you have to draw them all twice, right? Which is double the amount that you need for a regular flat environment or flat game. That's where the problem is. So it's that trade-off between trying to get up to 120 hertz and sustain it at a high quality graphics. So the Quest, for example, the one complaint I have, for all its comfort, it sacrifices the fidelity of the environment you're going to be in. When you have to port games to Oculus Quest, you really have to downgrade the graphics. You have to reduce the polygons, and it makes things look a little more cartoony. Most games in the Quest look a little more cartoony.
Yeah.
And if you look at Oculus Horizon, I'm kind of going on a side thing here, but if you've seen the early Oculus Horizon, Facebook Horizon, the environment they're building, sort of that social VR platform, it's purposely very cartoony, very low polygon count to improve the smoothness of it, right? So it looks nice, looks interactive. I mean, there's other reasons for doing it.
It reminds me like early 80s video games trade-offs. You'd have to sit there, but I could make it smoother by making a lower res. Yeah.
Exactly. There's also there's a game that just came out called What Lies Beneath, which is a horror game. There's a lot of horror games on VR. I play them because I just love VR. I don't really like horror games in particular, but they have some of the nicest graphics. And what Lies Beneath did is they went for a comic book type look. So again, they're able to do low polygons, release it on the Quest. The environments still feel nice and real, but it's because they look kind of like a comic book. They're not meant to look real. So they're avoiding the uncanny valley by not trying to make it look real. The same as, Allspace VR is also doing that.
We have a couple of things that's maybe for a different discussion, but when I got my goggles, I started exploring the YouTube VR stuff and realized that you've got different effects, so different approaches. So if I'm recording an actual event, I want to watch a movie in virtual reality, they have to have a camera that goes in and records these images, and then I play back those images from the position of that camera. I can't say, hey, what would it look like if I stepped over here, because that's not where the camera recorded it. When you're in a video game, they render it based on where you move your head. So you get those degrees of freedom where you can move around. Now, you have to have hardware that supports it. So like the Oculus Go doesn't actually support those degrees of freedom where the Quest does. But it made me realize that to get the full effect of all that, the world has to be rendered. It can't be pre-recorded, because otherwise I'm stuck with the original recorded thing. Yet sometimes I want that. I can see where people would want to watch a football game from a fixed camera or wherever, or be able to pick for a few different cameras. Maybe they can go on and see the football game from all those angles. So that would be pretty cool. I imagine sporting events, because some of those predefined videos, it's pretty lame. The state of the YouTube virtual reality channel reminds me of the state of talking movies in the early 20s. So the first full-length picture came out in 29. But up until then, all they had were clips of what would humans want to watch movie. A juggler. Get a juggler up there, Get somebody dancing. How about a dog doing tricks? And that's all you saw. Here's a bunch of dogs doing tricks. It was the cat video of the day. And that's where we are right now, where we got the cat videos. But something's going to really break it open. And I keep thinking it's training. So, and I'm sure you're familiar with this study. I think it was the guy who started Second Life, Philip Rosedale. He did that educational experiment where they mapped out these Egyptian tombs, and then they took children, I forget what age group they were, and they taught them this lesson. And they noticed something interesting, and I think about this ever since my first video game. When you represent the physical world in a digital world, you lose some things. Like this Zoom is losing certain dynamics of the room, but you gain some things. We can text each other. Can't text each other in the physical world. So some things are gained. When the children study the tomb, they were able to take virtual tours of the tomb as opposed to go into school and listen to a teacher lecture about tombs. A students stayed A students, but D students became A students as well. And they said, this is actually a better format for teaching children. Now, we've got in the United States all these school violence things. And I think, yeah, and school is boring. As they say, you usually get this sage on the stage, not a guide on the side, right? Children are learning more watching YouTube videos. I have this battle at home. I don't know what's healthy for my children to do and how many hours they should spend on their phone. But I don't feel like being a stupid parent going, I say 1 hour a night. To me, that's like when fire's first discovered and the parents who don't use fire see Johnny cooking his food and they're going, I say you can cook vegetables, but no meat. You know, where are you making this rule up? You've never dealt with fire. So I don't want to overburden my children with stupid rules. For all I know, they know better. And this is going to be the most important skill they can have. And that the future of education is going to be in virtual reality. I don't want to send my kid to a physical school. In fact, I already told my kid, if you ever feel like being homeschooled, it's okay. I'm like, I like going out and meeting friends. I get along, but thanks, if it ever happens. And when they complain about their teachers, I figure that they're probably telling the truth.
So there's a question in chat that I want to get to, but just before, because you broached the topic of YouTube, it's interesting because VR on YouTube is weird, and a lot of the content creators I talk to. So I'm a content creator as well, not a big one, but I talk to a lot of some of the other names in content creation, and the struggle we have as virtual reality content creators is really trying to portray what we see in VR on a flat screen. Because like I say, we record from our own perspective. There are some apps that allow you to set a camera in the environment, like VR chat, which then records what you're doing. But that's intensive, right? So we can't quite I like that picture there. You can't quite do that with a what was I going to say? With some of the new games. So if I'm recording in Half-Life Alyx, it's off my perspective. I would love for somebody to then watch that as though they were inside the VR game. So not watch it on YouTube flat, but have that option to actually, I want to see what you see. I want to see how you saw it.
Well, I'm able to do that on the Quest. You're able to do that on Quest. You can record.
It's doable, but I can't. So I don't have the reach that I would if I were to say post a YouTube video. You know what I mean? So YouTube.
But YouTube supports that. YouTube supports. They support it, and it was weird because I actually bought a camera that allowed me to do that, and I created a YouTube video, a music video. It's just me, doing something stupid, playing ukulele, and it worked. It like translated it, realized it, and then something happened at YouTube on their back end, and it forgot it was a 3D video. I don't know, but you can get those virtual reality, and it even lets you change positions. Even on a flat screen, if you don't have the goggles, it lets you look around.
Okay, I'll have to look more into that because I couldn't find those tools in the existing games. So, like for example, if I was recording Half-Life Alyx, I couldn't actually record what I'm seeing in the 3D environment, so people could walk through it exactly the same way I walk through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's exactly available in Quest. I didn't have it. I learned it in Quest because I did it for my I made a video of me doing the Beat Saber, and I wanted people to see what I saw. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then I'll have to revisit that. So I did want to talk on the question in chat here. VR, AR, direct mind PC link barriers, loss of privacy. Your private data is harvested and resold to eventually be denied shirts or loans like immigration points, etc. So this is a major concern in VR for sure. I've heard a lot of people lately talking about like what's Oculus, what's Facebook doing with all that data, because they want to monetize some of that data, right? So they're going to give you those free environments you can go into. If you want to get on Horizon, it's probably not going to cost anything. Don't quote me on that. But the idea is they want to bring people into social VR. They want to be able to track where your eyes are looking. They want to be able to collect kind of data on what you're doing. And there has to be some sort of thought about what does that mean.
I think it all comes down to ownership, and we should be able to charge them for that ourselves. And that's where the so-called universal basic income to me would be actually my fair share for what you're doing with my data. And so I don't have a problem with them doing that. I just want to get paid for it.
Yeah, and then I want, for me, it's on top of that is transparency, right? I want to know sort of what are you doing with that data? How are you?
Oh, sure.
Like that. That's important.
No, we need it. Those are the GDPR, the California Data Protection Acts. Those things that put the ownership of your data. Again, that even if it's your MRI, is your MRI. That's you. That should belong to you. That should not belong to a doctor. I can
Yeah,
give you
yeah,
the right to
exactly.
utilize it.
Right. So I think we're lucky if if VR had hit mainstream, say 5 years ago, we may not have tackled some of these problems as well as we have now. I think because they've come to light in the last few years, like GDPR, all this stuff is becoming very apparent that, that's how Google got big, is because they monetize your information, right? Now that we understand that, I think we're in a better position to tackle that, what that means when you're in a virtual environment. But there's all kinds of strange things when you go into AR and VR environments. So right now on Zoom, and so I'll give it a bit of a serious spin for a few minutes. I don't know all these people on Zoom at all, right? I could enforce everybody to turn on their cameras so I could see their faces, but how easy would it be to fake that? How do you know who you're talking to? In VR, it becomes even more difficult because you're dealing with avatars. So when I go into VR with Larry, I see an avatar representation of him. I don't know if it's really him, right? I have to make some assumption based on his voice, whether it's him. Here, I can see, like, I know those guitars on the back. I recognize your room. There's things about this I recognize. I'm pretty sure that I'm talking to Larry right now. But in VR, it is a bit different. I've had meetings in VR with people I don't know, and you kind of have that moment like, how do I know who I'm talking to? Is this really the person that I think I am? And who else is listening in? So the other thing with Zoom, which people don't always think about, but we do a lot of meetings over Zoom, you have to have a lot of trust, because at this very moment, there could be, I'm looking at Larry, but there could be someone standing on the other side of the computer listening to everything that's going on, right? Or he could be, he is recording. And Zoom shows you that it's recording so everybody knows. But there's other ways to record the session without anybody knowing, right? So there's all these sorts of things that, as we're working remotely, as we're using Zoom and as we're using VR, keeping in mind that it's not quite the same as if we were, say, together in an office building in a meeting room where I was fairly confident the walls are, somewhat thick, and I can see there's no one outside that room listening in, right? There's always like, yeah, there should be.
They're going to get a number of questions. I think you're familiar with the CISSP that on VPNs. And, that's a very debatable what virtual means. So as you just said, people could be recording the screen with tools that you don't know. Any Ring Zero utility can bypass any application's type of security, right? Just like a hardware keylogger, you can't tell. So, yeah.
But when you get comfortable in these environments, when you get comfortable talking on Zoom, when you get comfortable in VR, you start to feel like you have some sort of privacy because you're with the person, right? If you are in a very well done room in, say, like Roomy or Altspace VR, your mind, you start to feel like you're there with people, so you start to loosen up, and you might start talking about things you wouldn't usually talk about, not realizing that there's no way for you to know how it's being recorded, how that voice is being used or being transcribed, right? Because it's so easy to do.
It reminds me of somebody when they have their headphones on and they're talking to somebody on the phone and they can't tell that people outside can hear, or people singing a song with their headphones on. It's like, dude, we can only hear you. You're
Yeah, so I think that's going to take some getting used to, about like how do we handle privacy when we go into VR. So you were saying you wanted to be about 2 years away to be able to do this whole course in VR. I don't think it has to necessarily be that far away. I think it's still cheaper, and I've thought about this a lot. It's probably cheaper to buy and send someone a Quest if they were available, because right now they're out of stock almost everywhere. But for the $500-600 it costs to buy and ship someone a Quest, them to fly to see you, and then for you to hold that conference in a hotel, that would be more than $600.
That's awesome. Yeah,
it's almost cheaper to buy people VR headsets. Like if you're running a company and you want to do things with virtual reality, if you were going to do 4 offsites a year, it's cheaper to send someone a headset if they had the environments that could, make you feel
I could offer that as like an option to where it's like, I already own one. I can save money, but a lot of my students, their company is paying for it. And if they're going to buy them, hey, I get a headset, but if people are paying out of their pocket, they go, dude, I already have a headset. Oh yeah, you don't have to use ours, so whatever. I'd make that an option.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. I think that's going to become more popular kind of later on. That might become just like a laptop is the standard thing for us remote workers. There's companies typically pay for your setup, right? VR headset might be just part of the setup, and as it gets cheaper, it might not be that unreasonable.
Yeah, well, I'm really hoping we get the glasses. I really want something no bigger than this. I want to be able to just go, and I really prefer AR. I get a little. I love the virtual reality stuff, because even with my lower res Go, I was blown away by how quickly you disappear into that world. but I like to be conscious of the outside world. In fact, in my Quest, one of the first games I played was a boxing game. You map out an area that's supposed to be safe. I fight the guy. He hits me hard. I get annoyed. I go after him really hard. He goes down. And just because I don't care about your rules, I go to kick him like a mixed martial artist. And I kicked outside the zone and kicked my amplifier. And I almost broke my toes the first day I got my Quest. And I was like, you idiot. You're an idiot. So I really prefer AR if possible. So I'm not blocking out the real world most of the time. And in fact, they do the things with the contact lenses where they said, if you open your eyes, it's AR. If you close your eyes, they're still on, it's VR. That sounds really cool. Do you know anything about where are we in the contact lens thing? Do you know how far that is?
No, that I haven't paid a lot of attention to, because I think a lot about processing power and just what you can fit. And
yeah, I think about battery. How long is a battery? Is it going to be a field powered passive whatever device? I don't know how those work.
Yeah, I think it's years away. I think one of the things they're really relying on is the idea that you can do all this stuff in the cloud computing. Like you could basically render all your graphics.
Right. And just do like whatever screen information or something.
Yeah. And I think in practice, I'm not convinced that that's ready yet. So there have been a few services for like basically playing flat screen games and having all the rendering done in the cloud. And I just don't, there's so many ways that even though you have theoretically high speed internet, and then we're seeing it right now with so many people going at home and using Zoom and using their tools, you're not getting the performance that you should get because the performance relies on having only a certain number of people using the service at a time. You can easily kind of flood that bandwidth so that, if everybody is sitting at home and everybody's online and everybody's streaming this, all this cloud computing, you're going to run out of resources.
That bandwidth seems to keep coming out. I can remember, in fact, if Maurice is still here, when cable modem was first proposed, we had all these guys, Ken, I won't say last name, but was telling me why that was impossible because of the saturation of the cable modem and why it was not going to work out. The engineers already knew it and it came out, So the bandwidth, they keep solving those issues.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. So they will solve, and I think it's just a matter of time. I do remember quite vividly a conversation that I had. So my father was in telecom, way back. And they were first rolling out DSL. And there was an engineer they were working with who was convinced that DSL can never scale. It's like no one can have high-speed ADSL access because our infrastructure will never support it.
Sure.
And this is the
those old copper wires.
Exactly. And we see like we've easily surpassed that. So I don't think it's insurmountable. I think just the early things I've seen right now just aren't there yet. So if you're talking maybe 2 years, I think that's a reasonable idea before you can do all this with something smaller. I think if you want to do this sort of class in virtual reality, you can go into Altspace VR right now and you can host several people. You still have to go for that cartoony graphics, which I'm happy with, but you could probably host, I'm not sure what the limit is right now. But for a class this size, you could probably host everybody in there and talk on a stage and everybody could talk. The Verbella, the time we did that Verbella with Peter, I don't know how we had a lot of people in there.
I forget.
A lot of them were flat screen, I'm sure. They weren't all using VR, but it was quite a few people who would get in there, and it still felt, the interaction felt pretty natural. Sorry, I'm just reading some of the chat here.
Netflix has cash boxes they give out to ISPs so the traffic is handled on the local WAN.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I'm surprised how often. Now I have a household that'll have like 4 streams of Netflix going on at once because everybody wants to watch something different, and everybody's in their own bedrooms.
It reminds me of those what do they call WAN optimization tools? Remember, like it was a big company. Whatever. But yeah, they realize that there's some things that like say Netflix. There's going to be a lot of people locally that are watching whatever Game of Thrones. They don't need to pull it down from the main server,
Yeah, so that's exactly it. And for content that is static like that, so Game of Thrones, whether you're wherever you are in the world, it's always going to be the same episode, so you can cache it into places. Right. Now imagine if everybody's trying to watch Game of Thrones in VR and looking at
live, or watch a live football game.
Exactly.
Because then it can't be rendered. That's a live game, and then it's a lot harder. Yeah.
If your perspective is different from the perspective of someone else, you can't necessarily cache that, right? So on flat screen stuff, you can kind of control you know exactly how much data bandwidth you're going to need, and you can cache that closer, and that can help you a lot. When you're talking about rendering VR on the fly and people trying to interact with the environment differently, it's going to be different, right? Rendering that in the cloud is going to be slightly different than otherwise. So unfortunately, it is the same. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, so looking at the glasses, so basically, I would love to have the AR glasses. I think Apple is probably going to be the first to market with something that's reasonable, that people like, that, you know, meets that aesthetic appeal.
And that's my daughter's feeling too. She said, like, when they have the eye version and it's cool, and she's right. I think she's totally right. That's the fashion angle of it. You know, we've had all kinds of electronic stuff, but it wasn't until you had the iPad that it was like, ooh, that's sexy. You know,
the concern I have is going to be the same thing with when Google Glass came out. It's not that a lot of this technology isn't possible, right? You can get glasses which are pretty cool and can have a bunch of technology built in. The second you walk out of your house with those things and you start looking around and people immediately realize, wait a second, you might be recording. I don't know if you're recording, right?
well, you know, some of us could walk. I might as well walk around with this. Do you recognize that?
I do not. Talk
You
to
are
me about
too
this.
young. That is a Star Trek tricorder. Peter Diamandis would get that. That is a tricorder.
It couldn't possibly be a tri. You know, I thought, could this be something from Star Trek? But
Hold on here. Wait a second. So for people like me who are that nerdy, that have a tricorder, a phaser, and you know, sometimes this bulky phaser is ridiculous. I don't feel like carrying that. I could just slip this guy right in my pocket. You know, those people can wear those glasses. My daughter and her friends are not wearing Go, Oculus Quest, or whatever. It's got to be an eyeglass, and I agree with that's when we'll hit that saturation. Now, we were talking on Monday about the COVID thing and how this has become an accelerant for a lot of technologies, like maybe fast tracking pharmaceuticals or something, but for other things too. And I think the work from home, we obviously see how it's pushing the limits of Zoom, exposing vulnerabilities in Zoom, but I think it's going to push this, and that's why I'm hoping that. You know, again, I keep saying I don't want to make light of any suffering that's going on there. That's how I don't want to act cavalier toward that. But as we try to examine what are the good takeaways, what are the goods from this, and I think it can really push this market. And it doesn't make sense for us anymore to have to travel to work so much. It's a waste of environmental resources. We're poisoning the air. You know, we owe it to the wildlife that we stop doing this and mitigate that. And working from home, which we're all forced to do, is actually going to help a lot of things. Yeah. The first time I ever say, when did you? You're a lot younger than I am. So I first heard of virtual reality in the book Neuromancer. I think it came out in '84. I read it in '85 by William Gibson. Are you familiar with that book?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it though.
Oh, it's the first. That's where we get the term cyberspace. People went to work. This was before we had the internet. So I'm reading this and I've got a LAN of 8 users, a Novell 2.0 LAN. And it was like the entire world is networked. And I remember arguing with my friends too. It's like, why would I want a computer in my house, Green? And I got this Commodore 64 and everybody had computers. And they were all connected to this giant network that spanned the globe. And I'm like, the entire globe. They called it cyberspace. And they would connect with this headgear and they had the data glove. That was your interface. That's what we're still missing. That's kind of a haptic type kind of thing where you could manipulate the world around. So, and it showed some people were creating entertainment, but some people were breaking into places, and then they had intrusion detection systems that could capture you. And then you'd have the hackers would have somebody stand next to them, and if they overwhelmed the input, they could kill the guy, and they'd have to rip the headgear off, before the guy died. You'd have a spotter, In fact, it was one of the books was made into a movie with Keanu Reeves, and a horrible, horrible interpretation of it. Was it Johnny Mnemonic? I was so annoyed when that came out because it was supposed to hurt. Keanu Reeves decided, supposedly it was his idea, that going into virtual reality would hurt. That didn't hurt in the book. He would just go in and work. But when Keanu Reeves is like, yeah! I mean, it was like Captain Kirk. So that ruined it. But whatever the case was, I was a network a guy for Wang Laboratories at the time. And Cabletron, actually it's a couple years later, Cabletron has this Ethernet hub that becomes smart managed and through this SNMP protocol. And there's this graphic thing, where you could, and I was like, dude, that's what we should be doing with virtual reality. And I actually wrote a paper at Wang Laboratories on integrating the data glove. So I could be sitting at, the Wang, my office at Wang. Customer has a problem. I modem in at these new, 56K modems, with data compression, V.35. And I go over, I connect to his Cabletron modem to its slot. I see, here's the failing port. It's in slot 6, port 25. It's set for half duplex. You got to set it for full. There's your problem. Boom. But we just didn't have it. I was a little ahead of my time, but we're getting there. We really are at that point,
There's so a couple things. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things, so I think Lawnmower Man was may have been my first exposure to virtual reality.
I saw that the day it came out too. I was such a virtual reality goofball. And what do you think annoyed me about that? I hated that movie for one thing.
Tell me.
The scientist was Pierce Bronson. Okay. He thinks he discovers a way that can increase intelligence. You do? Now, who should I try it on? How about yourself? If you are a cook and you make something you think would be delicious, you should taste it. This would be delicious. Hey, let me get this idiot. Hey, you taste it. Tell me if that's good. That is so immoral to me. That is immoral. So what he did was he tested on this stupid Lawnmower Man. He should have tested it on himself. That was where and the whole movie went downhill from there.
But that was based on, so that story, and I don't want to diverge too much, but I seem to remember there's a book of the same idea, right? Where it was, I think they took a janitor. I remember I read it a long time ago. Someone had like this serum or something that would make people smarter. They tried it on a janitor, like below average intelligence, and then he becomes very smart, and then it wears off over time, and then he goes back to being like, he knows he's becoming less and less intelligent. I think that story has been redone.
But it goes to me like, I'm a big fan of Timothy Leary. He really helped me. That's why I like Peter Diamandis, because Timothy Leary had that acronym SMILE: Space Migration, Intelligence, Exponentially Increase, and Life Extension. He believed that we were, it just totally we're moving to space. And one of the things when he talked about was programming your brain with LSD, that you were able to get, like a flash update. You could actually reprogram, And he said, so what did the CIA do with it? They did Lawnmower Man. They found unsuspecting subjects and doped them with it to see what would happen. What did the Harvard Research Project do? They took it themselves. The professors took it themselves. That was much more moral. When you take it yourself, you're programming your own brain. When you give it to somebody else, especially unsuspectingly, you are brainwashing somebody, and that's immoral. To me, that's immoral. If you like that soup, if you think that's a good burger, you eat it. If you're not going to eat it, don't give it to somebody else. Yeah, that was the MK Ultra experiments, Joseph. Yeah, the CIA were doping all kinds of people, and that was very immoral to me. There's a great book, as an Abundance member just released it to me. It was, what's it called? Programming Your Brain with psychedelic drugs or something like that. And it just came out last year. It's a fantastic book. And I said I was such a big Timothy Leary fan, and he goes on and trashes Timothy Leary in there and all this stuff. And to be fair, all the criticisms they had of Timothy Leary were criticisms that I read from people who actually loved Leary very much. So he was not a perfect individual, by any means, I'm sure. And neither am I. So I'm not going to hold that against him. So in spite of his human weaknesses, he still stood alone to me in saying that this is a wonderful time in history. We are about to be born from a landlocked larval species to a multi-planetary spacefaring, it's like as significant as the first fish to smell air. We're becoming a new human, a new being. And I think that part is good for whatever his, private and public life problems were.
So I'm sure that conversation, we could talk for hours on that. And Sam Harris is one of the people I listen to regularly on podcasts. And he talks a lot about microdosing and sort of what the impacts of stuff like MDMA has and that sort of thing. if anybody is interested and wants to learn more about this stuff, I could highly recommend Sam Harris. He's done into a lot of meditation stuff, but he is my go-to person to kind of explore those things. And kind of learn about, you know, different things that are happening with LSD and that sort of thing.
It's supposedly pretty big in you know, Silicon Valley to spur new ideas and loosen up, you know, your attachments to certain paradigms. You know, it's a wonderful thing that we're learning that it's not just say no. It's like KNOW. No, you know, pharmaceuticals like fire. You can burn yourself. You know, but I don't want to get rid of fire. You know, these are great things. You know, my father never had fire. There's that. I said at the beginning of the class, I was some people miss it. I said there's a story I read recently about two guys, you know, prehistoric guys, cavemen, and one guy starts lighting fires and cooking food, and the other guy goes, that's kind of cool, but I'm going to wait till it's 100% safe because I've seen other people get hurt with it. I know it's dangerous, and we're the descendants of one of those guys. And it's not the guy who tried to be totally safe. We're never risk-free. Ryan, you've helped out a lot, and I could talk to you for hours. Well, guys, any other questions for Ryan besides being a VR guy? You know, Ryan is very, very knowledgeable security person, especially on endpoint security, at least compared to my knowledge, that's for sure. So we're going to be doing some more IDS stuff. What did I just ran into a couple of things. My wife is, I tell you, she's in the field always working, so she always makes me feel like an idiot. But I was telling her that you were with CrowdStrike, and she was telling me some of the capabilities her company uses it. For instance, like getting contents of RAM. So when we do incident response on day 5, we're going to look at tools like Encase Enterprise, or just discuss the ability to extract what's in memory, say for a malware attack, and then use that as evidence. And you know, the evidence will be questioned in court at competent and Encase Enterprise, Access Data Front. These are trusted tools in that field. But my wife said she gets the same information with CrowdStrike, that she can find the memory. And I asked her, can that be used in court? And so, or do companies still need to keep 2 tools that do the exact same damn thing? Or can I use CrowdStrike as, no, this is also trusted as a forensics tool. It's not just malware analysis.
Yeah, and I don't think it is right now, because there's still the, what's the term they say, how you handle evidence, like basically how many hands it's passed through before it's gotten to the point where it's being presented in court.
Right.
And my understanding at the
chain of custody, that chain of custody.
Thank you, chain of custody. And that, I mean, that has to be on CISSP exams.
It absolutely is. Some of you will get it, depending on which test, but some people get a half a dozen questions on it.
Yeah. And that's important. I know that there's some products that go to great length to ensure that chain of custody is done properly. Whereas my understanding was that, and this could have changed, I haven't been with.
It would require digital signatures from a number of things, from the forensics analyst, from the machine that was used on, so TPM could help and increase the integrity of that. But yeah. So that's the whole point. What does CrowdStrike provide a digitally signed version of what's in RAM? Or are they just more concerned with, let's analyze this quickly, you know, and find out what it is?
Yeah, they've been, in the past, they've been very much a move fast. So there's a lot of capabilities that CrowdStrike had, and especially things they caught on that we sort of had when we were using the product early on, and we realized, you know, this stuff, we could actually sell this capability. Like, our guys who had access to the sort of like the back end of what was going on with the product could think of innovative ways to do stuff like scrape RAM. But to give that out to the customer, then you have to start thinking about chain of custody. You have to start thinking about what are people going to do with that once they can scrape RAM. So I'm glad to hear that's become a feature that's, you know, like for everybody to use. But it is, I mean, once you've hooked the kernel on the endpoint, the sky's the limit. There's so many more things you can do. And I became a convert from network forensics to endpoint forensics, because you get so much fidelity when you're in the kernel, and you can see all the system calls, and you can see exactly what's going on the endpoint. So, I mean, I was a network guy for basically the whole time I was in government. I primarily did network sort of forensics, always watching, like, picking up a packet using Wireshark. As soon as I left government, I started doing endpoint stuff. I just I couldn't turn back, right? Like I got so involved
I
in.
didn't realize you were a Wireshark guy.
Oh yeah, yeah. I spent so many, probably like, I'd hate to try and count the number of hours I spent picking apart packets, trying to reconstruct. And that was
Yeah,
the
yeah. Well, that's what I have a TLS handshake up the entire time we're in class, and we go back and forth and watch, everything in there. And eventually, by tomorrow, they're going to know every field in the IP and TCP header. And
oh, that is good stuff. I mean, that's invaluable knowledge. But what I found often was I was trying to actually reconstruct what the user was seeing in the endpoint, right? So if someone is browsing to a web page, and I'm going to use a very simple example. If someone's browsing to a web page, they see everything rendered within the browser. When I look at the network packets, I have to try and reconstruct that. And there's all kinds of tools that'll try and reconstruct, and even ones that'll try and guess what you see in your browser based on the packets. But it's still not going to be all there, right? You're going to be missing something. And what I found was it was so much more valuable to see what's the person actually seeing. Also, how did they get to that point? So, you see the network packets going across there. I want to see, well, what application were they using when those network packets were sent? Were they, did they launch Outlook and then hit a web page and then get phished? Or
you
did
know
they,
what's so
okay.
bizarre? So I had to do a trace recently for a customer. The CEO, it's old 70-something-year-old guy. He has been using AOL Mail. I didn't know they were still a company. He worked from home. He was having extremely slow performance when he opened up an attachment. That's the description of problem. I go there and I turn on Wireshark. Apparently, Comcast is all IPv6, and your machine by default will do both. So it takes IPv6 by preference. Now I'm looking at IPv6 addresses, and I'm like, I can't even look at that. I hope it still works if I turn off IPv6 now. So I just turn that off, and IPv4, it's the same problem. So then I go, all right, so who's he talking to? And the AOL Mail client is so heavily laden with ads. When he opened up his mail, he established a connection to like 50 different TCP sessions were immediately established to try to figure out which one of those conversations was the actual mail problem. Was ridiculous.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's endpoint I've been using. And I mean, so I was at CrowdStrike, I basically wrote a lot of rules, heuristics, trying to find hackers. Spent a long time going after like sort of state sponsored stuff, did some e-crime things. The last couple of years, I've been using a lot more Carbon Black. After I left CrowdStrike, Tanium, I've used that as well.
That's another one my wife's doing. Carbon. Tell me about Carbon Black real quick.
So Carbon Black it's very similar concept. I mean, Carbon Black and CrowdStrike, they're definitely direct competitors. They came out roughly about the same time and both had the same idea. So Carbon Black also hooks the kernel. Carbon Black they bought Confer for their antivirus engine. So that's kind of what they're using based for antivirus. Because, I mean, on top of hooking the kernel and trying to look at what's going on in kernel space, they also just have a regular antivirus vendor as well. I like it. It's a good product. It's very similar. If you've used CrowdStrike, then you'll be very comfortable with something like Carbon Black. What's funny is Tanium is sort of a different direction. Tanium is more of they don't hook the kernel and look at what's going on. They're sort of you send queries out, queries run on the machine and gather information and then send it back. Whereas I see endpoint security like Carbon Black and CrowdStrike as being like a black box on the machine. It's hooked the kernel, it pulls all the information, and it's constantly sending information back no matter what, right? Like it's
all right. So let's tie this all together then. What are some of the threats that could happen in virtual reality, right? And what are some of the endpoint security features that would be needed to mitigate those threats? So if you were worried, what are some of the things you worry that somebody could do while you were, say, working at, brain jacking? That's what somebody just did. What are some of the things you could do? Like basically it's the Zoom hacks that we're seeing right now. So how would you I guess it would just be a very simple thing. You create a kernel hook for the operating systems for Quest and for whatever VR headset, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I actually want to start exploring. So right now I'm getting comfortable with the VR. Like I said, I'm building my VR cave, which is like just a massive room that is going to be dedicated to working remotely. So
he's putting like a little as we go. So he's been creating videos. I've been loving them where you just show even like how you're wiring the place, studying the place up. So we're going to get to see the whole soup to nuts,
yeah, and that's been,
cool.
I've had a lot of fun doing that. But then the next level of that is going to be create that environment. So the same size space in VR. And to talk to your point about AR, I'm going to be able to sit in that space knowing where everything is. So I'm going to map 3D object to match like where the furniture is in the environment.
Right.
So that when I host meetings there, I can like invite people into the environment. It'll feel natural. It'll be all customized. I'm going to create I'm not going to use one of the existing tools like Roomie or VR Chat. I'm going to build it up from scratch in Unity. And then invite people for meetings. But then I also want to start looking at, okay, what's from the security aspect, exactly what you're saying. How would someone hack into that? And if they could they basically say hack the feed so they could see and hear everything I see? So could they?
Or if you create like a virtual room, and you gave them, it's like a VM, or if I gave them access to the guest room, but did they get into my bedroom? So and that type of the stuff. And did they try to open the door? How many times did they try the door? These are some of the early indications that we might have a problem.
And so because this is kind of it's not widely adopted, it's not mainstream. There's not a heck of a lot of funding going into looking at those security things, right? Like so with Zoom, right? Suddenly Zoom is widely adopted, security holes start appearing.
Right.
If VR suddenly becomes widely adopted, that's
exactly. Sure.
So it's one of those areas where I'm interested. I want to get involved in, but I mean, there's not a lot of people looking for that right now.
Not yet. Yeah, I really think this is one of those things that's going to go from deceptive to disruptive soon. Like there are some things like nanotechnology, I think is going to really disrupt the world 15 years from now, maybe not today, not tomorrow, but I think 3D printing is going to get like, I kind of want to get into the construction business instead of buying like a Ford, 150 or something. I'm going to buy a little 3D printer robot, autonomous vehicle robot to help me just 3D print out a housing complex. Land is cheap here in Pennsylvania. The other thing is virtual reality. I just think that that's going to go. And this COVID, I don't like to call it social distance, the physical distancing, but increasing more than ever our requirement to socially get together, to get closer. And we can do that in virtual reality. We have the technology, right? We can do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I have to go in a couple minutes, or I have another call, but that's a preview of where I want to go with that. Once I have that set up, once I've built the room, I've built the virtual environment on top of that, I start bringing clients into that environment. Then I'm going to start exploring exactly what the security implications are. How can I actually start pen testing that and figuring out? So I'm lucky that at this stage in my career, I can actually take time away from other contracts to work on this stuff. Because before that, I just couldn't, right? But now I have the time to look at it and explore it, so that when it does go mainstream, I want to be ready. I want to already be running those tests and
skating to where you think the puck is going to be. And you're doing a great job with it. You've been an inspiration for me to watch those videos and see that. So I wish I had the time and the resources myself, but I'm too wrapped up in my stupid music projects that will never go. They make me happy. They make me happy.
Yeah, it's a creative outlet. I really enjoy. I don't think you put up. Now maybe I've been missing some, but I think the last one I saw was. Been a couple of weeks since I.
It's probably been a couple of weeks. Yeah. Well, with this, I'm not recording new stuff, and my brother sent me a song the other day. I'm going to work on. We'll see. But any other questions for Ryan? Guys, I've loved the feedback. It's been pretty cool here, and Ryan, thank you once again for. When do we see those vids? I did the one from yesterday and the day before. I just put them up late last night. This hopefully will be ready late tonight. So you do realize you're going to be on YouTube as before.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for inviting me, Larry. I really enjoy these. So anytime, and if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I mean, you're welcome to send out my business email. Anybody who's curious, you have questions, especially if there's something about this talk that I didn't cover.
Would you put that in the chat for the people? Do you have?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. That's fantastic. All
right, and so and I got to jump. So yes, thank you very much, Larry. I'll
thank you again. All right, take care, guys. Let's take a break.